Fireballs flash on the horizon. Noble mages are enjoying themselves at the tournament. The crowd watches and marvels. And a skinny boy by the smithy fence counts the intervals between the flashes and estimates the blast radius. Because yesterday, he was an engineer who designed artillery. Let's rewind 3 days. The heat hits his face first. Not a fever, the heat of a blacksmith's forge. Nathan opens his eyes and doesn't recognize anything. Sooty beams overhead, stone walls. The blanket reeks of sweat and smoke. He raises his hands and freezes. Thin wrists, calluses, burns on his fingers. Someone else's hands. Nathan remembers his own. Broad palms, a scar from a milling machine, a tattoo with his unit number. Those hands are gone. He sits up and the world spins. Nausea. He vomits bile onto the earthen floor. His body is empty, wasted down to the bone. The door creaks. An old man stands in the doorway, a gray ponytail, a blacksmith's leather apron. Eyes red from 3 days of sleeplessness. The old man rushes toward him, grabs him by the shoulders. The healer had already ordered the burial shroud to be prepared, but the sun has returned. The sun. Nathan closes his eyes and a stranger's memory strikes his skull. Name. Aric, 22 years old. The city of Holdren. His stepfather Hadrian took him in after his real father's death. His mother died in childbirth. His sister Mara is 3 years younger. Aric has spent his whole life at the anvil. Nails, horseshoes. He dreams of the blacksmith's guild. They won't take him. 20 gold coins for the entrance fee. He doesn't have a single coin. And most importantly, in a world where 1 in 10 is born with a spark of elemental magic, Aric was born empty. No fire, no water, no wind. Dull. That's what they say behind his back, but loud enough for him to hear. The shame of the dead blacksmith's family. Hadrian hands him a clay mug of herbal tea. Nathan swallows. Bitter. The warmth settles in his stomach. The old man mutters that Mara has gone for bread and will be back soon. To lie down, not to move. The fever hasn't broken yet. The old man leaves. Nathan is left alone and recalls the last thing that happened before this. The testing ground, the step, the heat. Testing a new model. The bolt jammed. He went over to check it. A flash, a roar, darkness. And now, a foreign body, a foreign world, a wooden bench in a smithy. 35 years of life have taught Nathan one thing: panic doesn't solve problems. He's an engineer. An engineer gathers data, calculates resources, makes a plan. He stands up. His legs are shaking. Clinging to the wall, he crawls out into the yard. The light stings his eyes. An anvil under a canopy, a trough of water, a woodpile. Beyond the fence, the crooked street of the town. Beyond that, hills. And to the east, flashes. Orange, blue, white, rising above the horizon like distant fireworks. Aric's memory prompts him. The Mages' Tournament. Once a season, noble houses gather at Count Renaud's castle and entertain themselves with exhibition battles. Battle mages, knights in enchanted armor, sometimes dragons. The common folk gawk from afar and gasp. Nathan doesn't gasp. Nathan calculates. A flash, a 3-second pause, another one. The blast radius is about 15 meters by eye. The speed of flight is like that of a thrown stone. Slow, monstrously slow. He shifts his gaze to the smithy. A bellows, hammers, tongs, sacks of coal in the corner, iron billets. Then back to the calloused hands of strangers who have been bending metal their whole lives. Then back to the horizon where the aristocracy flaunts its magic. And for the first time since waking up, he smiles. They play by their own rules. Mages decide everything. There's no future here for a dim-witted apprentice. By their rules. But Nathan knows other ways. He knows gunpowder. He knows ballistics. He designed artillery that ended wars. Those fireballs on the horizon are beautiful. like walking archers with backlights. Nothing more. He turns and walks back to the forge. 2 degrees in the field, 10 years in arms factories, 3 years at the firing ranges. A head crammed with blueprints this world won't see for 300 years. He sits down on a bench and remembers. Black powder, 75 parts saltpeter, 15 parts coal, 10 parts sulfur. Coal is available right in sacks. Sulfur. Ask Hadrian. Blacksmiths keep it for metal. Saltpeter. Manure piles. Cellars. A white coating on old stones. He'll find it. A tube is already taking shape in his mind. Iron. Wall no less than 5 millimeters thick. Priming hole on top. Wooden bed. First a wick lock. Then a flintlock. And then he feels a gaze. A girl is standing in the yard. Thin. Dark braid. Gray eyes. A basket of bread in her hands. Mara. Sister. She looks at him as if he were a ghost. For a long time. Then she speaks quietly. That his eyes are different. Nathan doesn't answer. He takes a piece of stale bread from the basket. Chews it. It's the best food he's eaten in this life. For 3 days, Nathan hadn't left the smithy. Hadrian thought his son was still weak after the fever. Mara brought him food and silently set it by the door. But Nathan wasn't sick. He was working. He spent the first day exploring. He searched every corner of the workshop and the basement. The tools were crude but serviceable. Hammers in 3 sizes, pliers, chisels. There was only one file, and it was worn down almost to the base. The forge ran on charcoal and produced enough heat to forge soft iron. They didn't know how to smelt steel here. They bought it from guild blacksmiths in the capital. About 20 iron blanks lay in the corner, rods and strips of varying thicknesses. Nathan picked up a bar and weighed it in his hand. The metal was soft. It would work for the first barrel, but it would last for 10 shots, maybe 20. Then it would break. It was enough for a prototype. In the basement, he found the main thing. A white crystalline coating on the stone walls. The basement was at least 100 years old. Damp. Dark. People and livestock had lived above it for decades. Organic matter had seeped into the stone and done its work. Nitrate. Potassium nitrate. Not pure, with impurities, but enough for the first batch of gunpowder. Nathan scraped the coating off the walls with a knife into a clay bowl. In 3 hours, he collected about 400 grams of raw material. It needed to be cleaned. He dissolved the scraped material in hot water, strained it through a cloth, evaporated it. Fine white crystals remained at the bottom of the bowl. He licked one, bitter and salty. Nitrate. The coal was right there in sacks by the furnace. Nathan crushed the pieces in a mortar he found in the kitchen. He needed a fine fraction. Dust. He pounded for 2 hours until his fingers ached. Sulfur. That evening, he asked Hadrian. The old man was surprised. Why do you need sulfur? Nathan said he wanted to try a new hardening method. Hadrian shrugged and pulled a clay pot from under the workbench. Yellow lumps. It smelled like rotten eggs. Blacksmiths use sulfur for cementation. They coated the iron with a mixture of sulfur and coal before heating it to make the surface harder. Here, it cost next to nothing. Nathan took the pot down to the basement. The next day, he began mixing. The proportions were etched in his mind forever. 75, 15, 10. He measured them out on a simple scale he'd fashioned from a board and 2 identical stones. The accuracy was plus or minus 10%. For black powder, that's acceptable. The components didn't just need to be mixed. They needed to be ground together. The wet method. Nathan added water, just a little. He turned the mixture into a paste and began grinding it with a pestle in a mortar. 40 minutes of nonstop work. His hands were burning. Sweat dripped from his forehead. He knew that in Earth's gunpowder factories, this was done by mills with bronze millstones. Here, he had only his hands. When the paste became uniform, he spread it in a thin layer on a clay tile and set it to dry by the furnace. Not too close. Wet gunpowder is safe. Dry gunpowder isn't. By the evening of the second day, he had his first pinch of black powder, 50 grams. He poured a little onto the stone floor of the cellar. He held a splinter of wood to it. A flash, a bright white flame, a cloud of smoke, the smell of sulfur and burning. Nathan stood in the smoke and looked at the black spot on the stone. The powder worked. Not perfectly. The burn rate was slower than that of commercial powder. The granulation needed improvement. But it burned. And it burned fast. Fast enough to propel a bullet down the barrel. On the third day, he set to work on the barrel. That was more difficult. On Earth, barrels were made by drilling or forging on a mandrel. Nathan didn't have a drill press, but he did have Aric's body's blacksmithing skills. He took an iron rod as thick as his thumb. He heated it until it glowed yellow. He flattened it into a strip. He wrapped it around a steel mandrel he'd found among Hadrian's tools. He hammered the seam. He heated it again. He hammered it again. 5 cycles. The seam had to be airtight, or the barrel would burst on the first shot. On the 6th cycle, he pulled the tube off the mandrel and examined it. Rough. Uneven. The bore was rough. About 30 centimeters long. Caliber roughly 15 millimeters. On Earth, it would have been junk. Here, it was the first firearm barrel in the history of the entire world. Nathan smoothed the inner surface with a round file. He drilled a priming hole at the top with a thin awl. He carved a rough stock out of a plank. He strapped the barrel to the stock with leather straps and wire. No lock. The first shot would be a fuse shot. Just bring the smoldering cord to the primer, just like in the 14th century on Earth. On the evening of the third day, he stood in the blacksmith's yard. Hadrian had gone to the tavern. Mara was in the house. Night. Silence. A torch burned in a holder by the wall. Nathan loaded the matchlock. He poured gunpowder into the barrel. About 10 grams. He stuffed a scrap of cloth in as a wad. He dropped a lead ball on top, which he had cast in a mold that afternoon. The caliber roughly matched the bore. He rammed it down with a ramrod made from a twig. He sprinkled a pinch of gunpowder onto the primer shelf. He braced the butt against his shoulder. He aimed at the stone wall of the courtyard, 5 paces away. He brought the smoldering fuse to the primer. A hiss, a second's delay, a pop. Not a roar, not an explosion. A dull, dry pop. The stock struck his shoulder. A cloud of gray smoke blanketed the courtyard. Nathan lowered the arquebus and walked over to the wall. There was a hole in the stone. Deep. The bullet had penetrated 2 fingers' depth. A wall a knight would have spent half an hour hacking at with a sword. 1 lead bullet. 1 pop. 2 fingers deep into the stone. Nathan stood in the smoke and looked at the hole. Then he laughed quietly. Not joyfully. Not maliciously. Wearily. Like a man who had been walking toward a door for 3 days and had finally opened it. Mages were hurling fireballs that exploded beautifully and frightened the crowd. A blacksmith's apprentice had just pierced the stone with a piece of lead from an iron pipe. No magic. No aristocrat's blood. No blessing from the gods. Saltpeter. Coal. Sulfur. Iron. Physics. He turned toward the house. Mara was standing in the doorway. She had seen everything. Her eyes were huge. She asked what that was. Nathan looked at her for a long time. Then he said it was the future. Mara didn't look away. She said she wanted to know how it worked. Nathan nodded. After the first shot, Nathan didn't sleep until dawn. He sat in the basement by the light of an oil lamp and drew. He drew with a stick on clay tablets, because paper in Holdren cost a day's wages. The first drawing was a diagram of an improved barrel. Longer, thicker walls, with a proper priming shelf and the beginnings of a flintlock. The second sketch was a diagram of a saltpeter pit, pits for producing saltpeter on an industrial scale. Straw, manure, ash, urine, lime, all of this is layered, and after 6 months it yields crystals of potassium nitrate. On Earth, they'd been doing this for centuries before they learned to mine Chilean saltpeter. The third drawing was a workshop plan, not a smithy, an arsenal. Nathan knew that a single musket meant nothing. You needed a steady supply, 10 barrels, then 100, then 1,000, and for every barrel you need gunpowder, and bullets, and a trained marksman, and military discipline. He thought about this, and the scale of the task weighed on him like a stone slab. One man, no money, no connections, no magic. In a backwater town on the edge of the county. Mara came in the morning. She brought bread and a jug of milk. She sat down next to him and silently looked at the blueprints. Then she asked what saltpeter was. Nathan explained, simply, without formulas. A white powder that forms when manure and urine decompose in the ground near limestone. It burns very quickly. When you mix it with coal and sulfur, you get a powder that turns into gas instantly when ignited. The gas needs space. If it's trapped in a tube, it pushes everything in front of it. A bullet, a stone, anything. Mara listened without interrupting. Then she asked a question that surprised Nathan. She asked if the powder could be made stronger by changing the size of the grains. Nathan stared at her. This 19-year-old girl from a backwater blacksmith's village had just asked a question about gunpowder granulation. The very question Europe had been grappling with for 200 years. He said yes, it's possible. And he explained that large grains burn more slowly and provide more even pressure. Fine dust burns too quickly and ruptures the barrel. The ideal grain size depends on the barrel length and caliber. Mara nodded. She said she wanted to help. Nathan agreed. He needed someone. He physically couldn't do everything alone. For the next 2 weeks, they worked together. Mara turned out to be something Nathan hadn't expected. She couldn't read, but she understood. Not through letters, through her hands and eyes. She saw how substances reacted with each other and memorized it. She tried 3 different methods of grinding gunpowder and found that the wet method, using alcohol instead of water, produced denser and more uniform grains. Nathan knew this. On Earth, they'd figured this out in the 17th century. Mara figured it out in a week through trial and error. He began to teach her, carefully. Not with formulas, with principles. Why some substances burn and others don't. Why metal becomes soft when heated. Why water turns into steam when it boils, and steam takes up 1,000 times more space. Mara absorbed it like dry earth absorbs rain. She had no word for science, but science was within her. By the end of the 2nd week, they had assembled 3 muskets. Each was better than the last. Nathan spent 2 days forging the 2nd barrel, a handspan longer than the first, thicker walls, the seam welded with 6 cycles. The 3rd barrel was even better. Nathan began refining his technique. Aric's hands remembered the hammer and anvil as naturally as breathing. 20 years of muscle memory at the forge. The engineer's mind provided precision. The blacksmith's hands provided execution. Together, they were a weapon. Hadrian noticed that something was happening in the basement. One evening, he went downstairs and saw 3 iron tubes on the workbench. Bags of gray powder. Lead balls in a clay bowl. Clay tablets with incomprehensible drawings. He looked at Nathan for a long time. Then he said he'd been smelling sulfur coming from the basement for a week, and that the neighbors could smell it too. Nathan realized he'd made a mistake. He'd been so absorbed in his work that he'd forgotten about secrecy. In a town where everyone knows each other, the smell of sulfur coming from a blacksmith's basement attracts attention. He told Hadrian the truth. Not the whole truth. Not about the other world, and not about the engineer in a stranger's body. He said he'd found a way to hurl stones without magic, without a bow, without a catapult. Just gunpowder and an iron pipe. Hadrian listened in silence. Then he asked to see. They went out into the yard at night. Nathan loaded the 2nd arquebus. He aimed at a wooden log by the fence. He fired. A pop. Smoke. The bullet went right through the log and into the ground behind it. Hadrian stood there, looking at the hole in the wood. His hands were shaking. He said it was like magic. Nathan replied that it wasn't magic. It was science. Hadrian didn't know that word. Nathan explained. Science is when you understand why things work and can repeat it the same way every time. Magic is a gift given at birth to 1 in 10. Science is available to anyone with a head and hands. Hadrian was silent for a long time. Then he said one thing that Nathan would remember forever. He said that if the Count's mage found out about this, he would burn the smithy along with everyone inside. Not out of malice, out of a sense of order. Because blacksmiths shouldn't have such things. Nathan knew the old man was right. He knew it even before the first shot was fired. Any archmage would dispel a musket with a single spell if he found out it existed. It would take time. Time to make not 1 musket, but 10. Not 10, but 50. Not 50, but 200. They needed to hide and build, and then surprise them. He told Hadrian that he knew, and that was exactly why no one should see what was in the basement. Hadrian nodded. Then he said that tomorrow he would board up the basement window and install a new door with a bolt. Nathan looked at the old man and, for the first time in this world, felt that he was not alone. Hadrian didn't understand what was happening, but he trusted his son, or whoever was now his son. The next day, Nathan began to think about money. Gunpowder and muskets required materials: iron, lead, sulfur, saltpeter, tools. All of this cost money they didn't have. Hadrian's smithy was barely scraping by. Horseshoes and nails brought in a few pennies. They needed a source of income. Nathan looked at the tools in the workshop and saw the answer: knives. He knew more about metallurgy and tempering than any blacksmith on this continent. Differential hardening, controlled carburization, the right tempering temperature. He could make knives and tools that would be twice as sharp and 3 times as durable as anything Holdren produced, and sell them, legally, out in the open, like an ordinary blacksmith who simply does his job well. And the money would go into the cellar, for gunpowder, for iron, for the future. The knives changed everything. Nathan spent 2 days on the first batch, 6 blades. He took ordinary Hadrian iron blanks and did with them what the local blacksmiths couldn't. First, carburizing. He coated the blades with a paste of coal dust and clay, sealed them in a clay box, kept them in the furnace at yellow heat for 4 hours. Carbon penetrated the surface of the iron and turned it into steel. Then hardening. Not simple. Differential. He coated the blade's tang with a thick layer of clay and left the cutting edge exposed. He heated it to a cherry red color. He plunged it into oil. The blade cooled quickly and became hard as glass. The tang cooled slowly through the clay and remained soft and resilient. The Japanese had been making katana this way for 1,000 years. Nathan made knives this way for the market in Holdren. The result spoke for itself. The blade cut through a hemp rope in a single stroke. It held its edge twice as long as any knife on the market. It flexed on impact and didn't break. Hadrian took the first knife in his hands and was silent for a long time. Then he said that in 30 years at the forge, he hadn't seen work like this. He asked where Nathan had learned this. Nathan said that while he had a fever, he had strange dreams. Hadrian didn't believe him, but didn't ask any further questions. At the Holdren market, the knives sold out in 3 hours, each for a silver coin. An ordinary knife cost 5 copper coins. A silver coin was worth 50, a 10-fold markup, and people paid. The butcher tested the blade on a pig carcass and silently pulled out his wallet. The leatherworker checked it on his belt and bought 2. The grain merchant took 3 for caravan security. 6 silver coins in a single day. Hadrian earned that much in a month. Nathan invested everything in materials. He bought 20 pounds of iron from a merchant in the neighboring town, 10 pounds of lead from a potter who used it for glaze, 3 pounds of sulfur from an apothecary at the market. He continued collecting saltpeter in the cellar. Mara suggested gathering it in abandoned stables outside the city. There, manure had accumulated over the years, and the walls were white with crystals. She turned out to be right. In a single trip, they collected 2 kilograms of raw saltpeter, more than Nathan had scraped off the basement walls in a week. A month passed, then another. Nathan got into a rhythm. In the morning, he forged knives and tools to sell. In the afternoon, Mara purified the saltpeter and prepared the gunpowder mixture. In the evening, Nathan worked on weapons in the basement. The third matchlock, the fourth, the fifth, each better than the last. By the sixth, he had mastered a primitive flintlock. A piece of flint clamped in iron jaws struck a steel plate. Sparks fell onto the powder shelf. Ignition. No fuses. The time from pulling the trigger to firing was cut from 3 seconds to half that. That was important. In battle, 3 seconds is the difference between life and death. By the end of the second month, Nathan had 10 working muskets, all with flintlocks, all tested, all fired. The effective range was about 50 paces. The bullet pierced a 1-inch plank at 30 paces. It would have pierced chainmail, too. Plate armor, most likely not. But only knights wore plate armor, and there were few knights. The bulk of the soldiers on Velmark fought in chainmail and leather jackets. For them, a matchlock was a death sentence. 10 matchlocks lay in the cellar, wrapped in oiled cloth. 10. A good number to start with, but there was no one to fire them. Nathan couldn't fight alone. A matchlock without a unit is just a stick. He needed people. He needed soldiers. The problem was that he couldn't hire soldiers. He had neither a title nor the right to recruit armed men. In the kingdom, raising a militia was a privilege reserved for nobles and mages. A peasant with an army is a rebel. Rebels are hanged. Nathan thought about this for 3 days, and he found the answer not where he was looking. The answer came to him on its own, in the form of 5 young men whom the people of Holdren called scum, orphans, vagabonds, day laborers, guys with no family, no trade, no future. There were guys like that in every town. They worked for food. They slept in barns. They were chased away from everywhere. The army wouldn't take them because they didn't have money for equipment. The guild wouldn't accept them because they didn't have a master to vouch for them. They had nothing to lose. Nathan came to them in the vacant lot behind the market where they were burning a bonfire and sharing stolen bread. 5 guys between 17 and 25, skinny, angry, wary. He offered them work, food, shelter, payment in silver. One condition: complete obedience and silence. They exchanged glances. The oldest, named Davin, asked what kind of work it was. Nathan said he would teach them a trade that would change their lives. Davin asked what trade. Nathan replied that they would find out once they agreed. 4 agreed immediately. The 5th, Davin, thought for a minute. Then he nodded too. The next morning, the 5 guys stood in the blacksmith yard and watched as Nathan pulled an iron pipe with a wooden stock out of the basement. He loaded the musket. He aimed at the target, a wooden shield 50 paces away. He fired. A bang, smoke, a hole in the shield. The 5 stood with their mouths agape. One of them, a guy named Tor, fell to his knees. He decided it was magic and that Nathan was a secret mage. Nathan said no magic, iron, gunpowder, lead, and any of you can do this in a week. He placed the arquebus in Davin's hands, showed him how to hold it, how to aim, how to pull the trigger. Davin fired, missed. His hands were shaking. Second shot, closer. Third, hit. Davin lowered the arquebus and looked at Nathan. His eyes were burning. He said that his whole life he'd watched knights and mages decide who would live and who would die, and that for the first time in his life, he was holding something that put him on equal footing with them. Nathan nodded. Exactly. That was the goal. The 3rd month began with discipline. Nathan knew from military history that weapons without tactics were useless. The Turkish Janissaries won, not because their guns were better. They won because they stood in formation and fired on command. 5 guys with muskets aren't a squad. They're 5 individual shooters who will scatter at the first onslaught. They needed drill. Nathan wasn't a drill sergeant. He was an engineer. He knew how an army worked in theory. He'd read the memoirs of military commanders. He'd studied the tactics of musket formations from the 16th to the 19th century. But he'd never commanded men in the field. He needed someone who knew how to do that. And he found that person. Sergeant Corvin arrived in Holdren in the middle of the 3rd month. A 38-year-old mercenary, missing his left arm below the elbow. The stump was wrapped in a leather strap. His face was scarred. He had the eyes of a man who had seen too much death. He came to the city because he had nowhere else to go. 20 years in mercenary companies, 3 wars, 16 sieges, 4 assaults, then a duel with a mage on a dare. The mage proved stronger. A fiery whip severed his arm at the elbow. Without an arm, the mercenary became a liability. His company discharged him. The Warriors Guild denied him a pension. Corvin wandered the roads, drinking on his last few coins. Nathan found him at Holdren's tavern, drunk, angry, ready to kill anyone who looked at him the wrong way. Nathan sat across from him and ordered him some food. Corvin asked what he wanted. Nathan asked if he knew what drill training was. Corvin laughed. He said he'd spent 20 years yelling at recruits to hold their shields straight. Nathan said he didn't need shields. He needed someone to teach 5 guys to stand in a line. Not to scatter, to shoot on command, to reload, to shoot again. Corvin said that sounded like a crossbowman's firing line. Nathan said it was similar, but not quite the same. He took Corvin to the smithy at night. He showed him the arquebus. He fired at the target. Corvin stood and watched. He didn't fall to his knees like Tor. He wasn't scared. He was a veteran. He'd seen mages burn entire regiments with a single spell. But Nathan saw something change in his eyes. Corvin walked up to the target. He touched the hole with his finger. Then he turned to Nathan and asked at what distance it pierced chainmail. Nathan said 30 paces. Corvin asked, "And plate armor?" Nathan said, "Not yet, but it would be." Corvin nodded. Then he said one sentence. 30 paces, chainmail pierced through. Any peasant. No sword training, no strength, no magic. Just struck and killed. Nathan confirmed it. Corvin sat down on a barrel and was silent for a long time. Then he said he agreed. He wasn't interested in payment. He said he wanted to see how it worked in battle, at least once. The next morning, Corvin took 5 guys and started breaking them. Not with cruelty, with a system. Up before dawn, fall in line, step forward on command, stop on command, about face, forming from 1 line into 2, from 2 into 1. 5 hours of drill training without weapons. Then an hour with muskets. Aim, fire, reload, on command, only on command, not before, not after. Whoever fires without a command washes the cauldrons for 3 days. The guys groaned. They whined. Davin once threw his musket to the ground and said he wasn't going to put up with the one-armed old man's yelling. Corvin walked up to him calmly, picked up the musket with one hand, handed it back, said that on the battlefield, whoever throws down their weapon dies first. Davin took the musket and never threw it again. 2 weeks later, the 5 of them were firing on command. 3 ranks. The first fires, the second reloads, the third prepares. On command, the first steps back. The second steps forward and fires. A barrage, continuous fire. Nathan stood to the side and watched as 5 former vagabonds fired 3 volleys a minute. Not perfect, misses, delays, but the formation held. They didn't scatter. Corvin knew his stuff. At the end of the 3rd month, what Nathan had both hoped for and feared happened. A gang, 12 men, bandits from the forest west of Holdren. They had been raiding villages and farms for half a year, looting, killing. Count Renaud's local garrison consisted of 10 soldiers who guarded the market and collected taxes. They had no intention of catching bandits in the woods, not their concern. The peasants complained. The peasants were ignored. Nathan learned about the gang from Mara. She had heard at the market that bandits had ransacked a farm 2 hours' walk away. They killed the owner. They took the livestock. Nathan gathered his 5 men that evening. Corvin stood nearby. Nathan said this was their first battle, a real one, not targets, living people who would try to kill them. If anyone wanted to leave now, they could. No one left. They set out at dawn. Nathan took 6 matchlocks, 5 for the marksman, 1 for himself. Corvin carried a supply of gunpowder and bullets. Mara stayed in the smithy. Nathan forbade her from going. She argued, he insisted. They found the gang's camp by noon, a clearing in the forest, huts made of branches, a campfire, horses tied to trees, 12 men, swords, axes, 2 bows. Nathan positioned the marksmen behind fallen trees at the edge of the clearing, a distance of 40 paces. Corvin whispered orders for their positions. Each archer knew his sector. Nathan waited. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His hands were shaking. This was the first time he was going to shoot at people. At the firing range in his past life, there had been only targets and dummies. Here, there were living people. Murderers and robbers, but living. He clenched his jaw, raised his hand, lowered it. A volley. 5 shots merged into almost a single one. Smoke billowed over the edge of the forest. Screams. 3 bandits fell at once. Another clutched his shoulder. The rest jumped to their feet, grabbing their weapons. Not understanding what was happening. Reloading. Corvin counted aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Gunpowder, wad, bullet, ramrod, primer. Second volley. 2 more fell. 1 ran. The rest also rushed into the forest. No one tried to attack. They didn't see the enemy. Only smoke and the roar and the death of their comrades. 3 minutes later, the clearing was empty. 5 dead, 2 wounded. The rest fled. Nathan lowered his musket. His hands were shaking. He felt sick. He stepped behind a tree and threw up. Corvin approached. He looked at him. He said that throwing up after your first battle was normal. Everyone throws up. Then they stop. Nathan straightened up. He wiped his mouth. He looked at the clearing. 5 dead bodies, blood on the grass. The smoke hadn't cleared yet. He had just killed people. For the first time in both of his lives. They walked back in silence. The guys were pale. Tor carried his arquebus pointed down at the ground and stared into space. Davin walked straight ahead, clenching his jaw. Corvin brought up the rear. In Holdren, news of the gang's defeat had spread within a day. No one understood how it had happened. 6 unarmored men had routed a dozen armed bandits and lost not a single man. People were whispering. Some said that Hadrian's son had dabbled in dark magic. Others said he had found an ancient artifact. Nathan listened to the rumors and realized that the time of silence was coming to an end. The more victories, the more attention. The more attention, the closer the moment when Count Renaud would learn of the blacksmith's boy with the thunder rods. And he would send not bandits, knights. The rumors reached Count Renaud's castle 2 weeks later. Nathan knew it would happen. A small town, dead bandits, 6 guys without armor. People were talking. Merchants carried the gossip from Holdren to the neighboring villages. From there to the castle. Nathan made full use of those 2 weeks. He doubled production. Mara worked 12 hours a day. The saltpeter pits they had dug in the first month began yielding their first harvest. The crystals were dirty. Mara developed her own purification method, triple recrystallization with intermediate filtration through sand and ash. The yield of pure saltpeter tripled. Nathan looked at her notes. She kept them on birch bark with a charcoal pencil. Symbols instead of letters because she never learned to read. Her own symbols, her own language. But the data was accurate. Every batch of gunpowder was numbered. The proportions were recorded. The test results were noted. Mara kept a lab journal without knowing what a laboratory was. By the fourth month, Nathan had 20 muskets. The barrels had improved. He had mastered the technique of forging from 2 strips. One strip was wrapped around a mandrel. The second was welded over the first with an offset seam. Double wall, double strength. The barrel withstood 50 shots without visible deformation. On Earth, this was primitive. Here, it was a miracle. People came on their own. After the gang was defeated, those whom life had backed into a corner flocked to Nathan. First, 2 brothers who had lost their home to a fire in a neighboring village. Their farm had been burned down by the Count's tax collectors for unpaid taxes. Then a hunter whose leg had been broken by a magical beast and who had been out of work for 3 months. Then 4 guys from Holdren who had heard about Davin and wanted the same. By the end of the 4th month, Nathan had 15 men. Corvin drove them from morning till night. Drill, shooting, reloading. Drill, shooting, reloading. Every day. No days off. Corvin said that a soldier is made not by muscles but by habit. The body must act without the mind's involvement. Load, raise, fire, step back. Load, raise, fire. Until your hands start doing it in your sleep. Nathan built a shooting range in a ravine outside town, far from the roads, far from prying eyes. Targets made of straw bales at various distances. 30 paces, 50, 70. Only Davin hit at 70. The rest missed. At 50, 7 out of 15 hit. At 30, everyone hit. Nathan settled on 30 paces as the working range. Closer than he'd like, but enough for the first battles. Range would come with better barrels and better gunpowder. He began to think about tactics. 15 shooters in 3 ranks meant 5 men in each line. The first rank fires, steps back. The second row fires, retreats. The third row fires. By then, the first row has reloaded. Continuous fire, 5 bullets every 10 seconds, 30 bullets a minute. At a distance of 30 paces against unprotected infantry, that would be terrifying. Against knights in armor, it's less effective. But Nathan wasn't going to shoot at the armor. He was going to shoot at the horses, at unprotected legs, at faces without visors, into the gaps between the plates. And most importantly, into the formation. Not at individual men, at the mass. Sweeping fire across the area. You're bound to hit something. Corvin listened to his plan and nodded. He said it sounded like crossbow tactics, but faster. Nathan said that speed was exactly where the difference lay. A crossbowman reloads in 30 seconds, a musketeer in 15. During a skirmish, the fire is continuous. Crossbowmen can't provide continuous fire. Musketeers can. Corvin said that a crossbow shoots farther and more accurately. Nathan agreed. For now, that will change. The 5th month began with a visit. Nathan was in the smithy, forging another barrel. Hadrian was working nearby. 4 horsemen rode into the courtyard. Chainmail, swords. Count Renaud's coat of arms on their cloaks. Soldiers of the castle guard. The senior officer dismounted and entered the smithy. Young, arrogant, hand on the hilt of his sword. He said the Count had heard of a blacksmith from Holdren who made unusual things, and that the Count wanted to know exactly what kind of things. Nathan set down his hammer, wiped his hands, looked at the soldier calmly. He had expected this. He was prepared. He said he made knives, very good knives, the best in the county. If the Count wished, he was ready to supply a batch for the castle kitchen. The soldier frowned. He said this wasn't about knives. It was about thunder. People say the blacksmith's son summons thunder without magic, and that with this thunder, he killed bandits in the forest. Nathan shrugged. He said people talk too much. They caught the bandits off guard. A standard ambush. Bows and axes. No thunder. The soldier didn't believe him. It was obvious. But he didn't have orders to search the smithy, just to find out. He mounted his horse and rode off. Nathan stood in the yard and watched them ride away. He had maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month. Then they'd come back, and not with questions, but with swords. He turned to Hadrian. The old man stood as white as a sheet. His hands were shaking. Nathan told him it was time to move the workshop. Hadrian asked where. Nathan said he knew a place, an abandoned mine in the hills north of Holdren. Mara had found it while searching for saltpeter. Old copper workings, dry, spacious, ventilated through 2 shafts, far from the roads, far from the Count's eyes. The move took 4 nights. They carried everything by hand: pipes, gunpowder, tools, blanks, supplies of lead and sulfur. 15 men in a chain in the dark along goat trails. Corvin grumbled that it felt like a retreat. Nathan replied that it wasn't a retreat. It was a redeployment, a strategic one. It was cold in the mine, damp, dark. Nathan assigned the rooms. The main hall for forging, a side tunnel for gunpowder production, the far hall for storage, living quarters at the entrance. Corvin set up a guard post at the entrance, 2 men per shift, around the clock. The first week in the mine, everyone froze and cursed everything under the sun. Then they got used to it. Nathan didn't let them slack off. A strict daily schedule. Morning roll call on the clearing in front of the entrance. Production during the day. Shooting practice in the far ravine in the evening. Study sessions at night. Nathan taught literacy to those who couldn't read. Not out of humanitarianism, out of necessity. A shooter must be able to read an order, must be able to judge distance, must understand commands. By the 6th month, there were 30 men in his unit. 15 more came from the surrounding villages. The rumor wasn't about thunder. The rumor was that there was a man in the hills who fed them and paid them in silver. For landless peasants, that was enough. Nathan met each one personally, looked them in the eye, asked why they had come. If they lied, he sent them back. If they told the truth, he kept them. 30 marksmen, 20 musket workers. A supply of gunpowder for 300 shots, 2 saltpeter pits running at full capacity, a workshop that produced 2 barrels a week. It was more than Nathan had dreamed of 4 months ago, and it was a pitifully small amount compared to what was coming. Count Renaud would not forget, he would not forgive, and when he learned the truth, he would not send 4 guards, he would send 200 knights. Count Renaud sent the punitive force in the 7th month, not 200 knights. Worse, 50 soldiers and 1 mage. The mage was young, from the Count's retinue, element of fire, not an archmage, a second circle battle mage, fireballs and a fire shield. For a peasant band, that should have been more than enough. Nathan found out about them 2 days ago. One of his men, a lad named Ren, had worked as a stable hand in Holdren and overheard a conversation between the Count's messengers. 50 soldiers, a mage, an order to find and destroy the rebel band in the hills. Nathan called a council. Corvin, Mara, Davin. The 4 of them in a cramped tunnel by the light of an oil lamp. Corvin said that 50 soldiers was serious business. Not bandits, trained men, chainmail, shields, swords, and a mage. Nathan asked what a mage could do in battle. Corvin answered from his own experience. A second circle battle mage casts a fireball 60 paces away. 1 fireball every 5 seconds. The blast radius is 3 paces. A fire shield blocks arrows and crossbow bolts. A spear pierces through, but you need a running start. Nathan did the math in his head. Fireball, 60 paces, 1 every 5 seconds. That means 12 per minute. Radius of 3 paces. Each fireball kills 1, maybe 2 if the formation is dense. 12 people per minute if every shot hits. That's a lot. But there's a catch. There's only 1 mage. He can't shoot at 30 targets at once. If the formation is spread out, casualties decrease. And the arquebus has a range of 50 paces.
If the mage moves within 60 paces to cast a fireball, he'll be in the kill zone in 10 paces. The only question is the shield. Nathan asked Corvin if anything could penetrate a fire shield. Corvin said a heavy crossbow does, if you hit the same spot twice. A lead bullet is heavier than a crossbow bolt, and faster. Nathan decided it was worth testing, but not in battle. He chose a position 3 days before the punitive forces approach, a narrow gorge half a league south of the mine, the only path through the hills. The punitive force would take it because there was no other way. The gorge was 200 paces long, 10 paces wide at its narrowest point. Stone walls 3 men high, an ideal position for an ambush. Nathan positioned archers on both ridges of the gorge, 15 on each side. Crossfire. Corvin complained that it was dangerous. They might hit their own men. Nathan explained the firing angles. The left ridge fires down and to the right. The right ridge fires down and to the left. The trajectories diverge. With disciplined fire, friendly fire was impossible. Corvin looked at him for a long time and said it was madness, but madness that might work. Mara brought a supply of gunpowder and bullets, 20 rounds per shooter, 600 shots. For 50 men in a narrow gorge, that was excessive. Nathan didn't want to take any chances. At the entrance to the gorge, he set up a barricade. Fallen trees, rocks, ropes stretched at horse-knee height, to slow them down, to break their stride, to force them to stop. The same at the exit. A trap. A classic ambush with a fire trap. Nathan had read about such tactics in books on guerrilla warfare. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Chechnya. It worked the same everywhere. Lure them into a narrow passage, block the exits, shoot them from the flanks. He stood on the ridge of the gorge and looked down. Quiet. The wind whipped dust along the trail. In 2 days, people would be dying here. People who were simply following their señor's orders. Not bandits. Soldiers. They had families. Children. Nathan closed his eyes. He could retreat. Lead the men deeper into the mountains. Hide. Buy another month. But then they'd send more. And more. Running away didn't solve the problem. The only way to stop the count was to make him pay a price. Make him count the losses. Nathan opened his eyes. War is never clean. He knew that in his past life. Now he knew it in this one. The punitive force entered the gorge in the morning. Fog, gray light. 50 soldiers marching in pairs. A mage at the front, next to the commander, on horseback. Nathan counted them from the ridge. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, all inside. The lead patrol ran into the barricade at the exit. They stopped. Confusion. Nathan raised his hand, lowered it. 30 muskets fired simultaneously, 15 from above on the left, 15 from above on the right. The roar was deafening. The echo bounced between the stone walls and amplified the sound. It seemed as if 100 were firing. Smoke filled the gorge. Screams, the neighing of horses. The first volley took down 15 men. They fell from their horses and onto top of one another. In such a narrow space, there was nowhere to hide. There was nowhere to hide. Arrows could be blocked with a shield held overhead. Bullets came from above and from both sides at once. The shield offered no protection. Reloading, 12 seconds. The second volley, 10 more fell. The mage acted quickly. Nathan gave him credit. He instantly cast a fire dome over himself and the commander. Fireballs flew upward toward the ridge. One struck the rocks 5 paces from Nathan. The heat burned his face. Shards of rock cut his arm. But a fireball at that distance was inaccurate. The mage was firing blindly, upward, into the smoke, without seeing his targets. Nathan called out the 4 best marksmen, Davin, Tor, and 2 others. Target, the mage. The fire dome, 4 bullets at a single point. Volley, 4 pops. 3 bullets struck the dome and ricocheted. 1 got through. It pierced a weakened spot and hit the mage in the thigh. The mage screamed.
The dome flickered. Nathan called for a general volley. 30 bullets into the flickering dome. The dome collapsed. The mage fell. The commander next to him as well. After that, the battle was over. The remaining soldiers dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Some tried to run back toward the entrance. They ran into the barricade. They fell. They surrendered. 10 minutes later, it was all over. Nathan descended into the ravine. Smoke still hung in the air. The dead and wounded lay mixed together. Moans, blood on the rocks. Horses were darting among the bodies. Nathan ordered that aid be given to the wounded, to everyone, both his own men and the enemy. Corvin looked at him in surprise. Nathan said that the dead don't spread the news. The wounded do. He wanted the survivors to return to the Count and tell him, not how many were killed, but how they were killed. 30 peasants in an ambush had wiped out 50 soldiers and a mage in 10 minutes, without any losses. Not a single casualty on Nathan's side. 3 lightly wounded by stone shrapnel from the fireball. Corvin stood in the middle of the gorge and looked at the dead knights. Then he turned to Nathan. His eyes were shining. He said quietly that he had fought for 30 years and was seeing this for the first time. That this wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter, and that whoever wielded this weapon would rule the world. After the gorge, Nathan gained 3 things: time, reputation, and a problem. Time, because Count Renaud couldn't send a second expedition immediately. He had lost 50 soldiers and a mage, a third of his garrison. It was impossible to make up for such losses in a week. Nathan estimated he had 2 months, maybe 3. A reputation, because the rumor of the massacre in the gorge had spread throughout the county in a matter of days. The wounded survivors told the story in every tavern, from Holdren to the county capital. 30 peasants had wiped out a detachment with a mage, without magic, with thunder rods. People retold the story to one another, and with each retelling, the story grew more terrifying. A problem, because now everyone knew about Nathan, and the Count's neighbors, and the merchants who carried the news to the kingdom's capital, and the royal court, and the archmages. Nathan understood that the window of silence had closed forever. From now on, his every move would be under surveillance, and his only defense was speed. To move faster than his enemies could react. He had invested everything in growth. The mine had turned into a veritable arsenal. Mara managed the gunpowder production. 3 workers under her supervision ground and mixed the powder for 12 hours a day. The output was 40 pounds of gunpowder a week. Nathan forged the barrels. 2 a day. Hadrian helped. Aric didn't ask questions. He saw the dead soldiers brought out of the gorge on a cart. He saw the faces of the survivors. And he realized that his adopted son was doing something that would change the world forever. Corvin recruited and trained people. New recruits arrived every week. 5, 10, sometimes 15. Peasants, hunters, former miners, people with no future to whom Nathan gave weapons and a purpose. By the 8th month, he had 60 marksmen. By the 9th, 80. By the 10th, 100. 100 musketeers, each with a flintlock musket, each trained in the caracal. Each could shoot at 50 paces with a 70% chance of hitting. Nathan began to think about the next step: artillery. The musket solved a tactical problem. It killed infantry and light cavalry. It was less effective against heavy knights in full armor. Against magical shields, it only worked with concentrated fire. Against fortifications, it didn't work at all. He needed a cannon. Nathan knew the design: a cast bronze tube, or a forged iron one, a wheeled carriage, a charge of grape shot, or a cannonball. The problem was the materials. Bronze was expensive. He didn't have any casting equipment. It was possible to forge a cannon barrel out of iron, but that was many times more difficult than a musket barrel. Longer, thicker, heavier. Any defect in the seam would cause the barrel to rupture upon firing and kill the crew. Nathan thought about it for 3 days. Then he found a solution. Not perfect, but it worked. He would use the hoop technology. Iron rings would be heated and fitted around the barrel. As they cool, they contract and tighten around the barrel like a barrel. Additional strength. He could use a thinner main barrel and reinforce it with hoops. It was easier than forging a monolithic tube. On Earth, that's how the first European bombards were made in the 14th century. He got to work. He spent 10 days forging the barrel of the first cannon. 3-inch caliber, 4 feet long, weighing about 100 pounds. 12 hoops bound the barrel from the breech to the middle. A carriage made of oak planks on 2 wagon wheels. Rough, primitive, but it was a cannon, the first artillery piece in Velmark's history. The test was conducted at dawn in a distant ravine. Nathan loaded a pound of gunpowder and a bag of iron shot, 20 pieces of chopped iron the size of a fingernail. He aimed at a wooden shield 60 paces away. He lit the fuse. The roar was so loud that leaves rained down from the trees. The recoil threw the carriage back 2 paces. A cloud of smoke filled the entire ravine. When the smoke cleared, the shield was gone. Debris from the planks was scattered 10 paces around. The grape shot had blown it to smithereens. Corvin stood nearby and said nothing for a full minute. Then he asked if they could make another one. Nathan said they could. It would take time and iron. A lot of iron. Era appeared at the end of the 10th month. Nathan hadn't expected her. No one expected her. A 24-year-old girl, tall, dark hair down to her shoulders. A traveling cloak made of fine fabric, gloves, riding boots. She came alone, on foot, without a horse. The guards brought her to Nathan at gunpoint, 2 arquebuses aimed at her. She looked at the muskets with interest, not with fear, with interest, like a scientist examining a new mechanism. She introduced herself as Era of the Alsven clan, an elemental mage, water, 3rd circle. Nathan knew that the 3rd circle was serious, above average, below archmage. He asked why she was here. Era said her clan had banished her 2 years ago, for taking an interest in alchemy and mechanics instead of combat magic. The Alsven clan had been raising combat mages for the royal army for 8 generations. A mage who studies gears instead of spells is a disgrace. The clan is bound to uphold tradition. Era had broken tradition. She had heard about the thunder weapons in Holdren. She questioned merchants. She traced the rumors to the hills. She walked for 3 days. She found the mine by following the tracks of the carts. Nathan asked what she wanted. Era said she wanted to understand how it worked. Not magic, something else. Something magic couldn't explain. And this something else interested her more than anything her family had taught her. Nathan looked at her and saw himself. Not literally. He saw a person who didn't fit into the framework of his world and who had been cast out for it. He told her the truth. Gunpowder, nitrate, coal, sulfur, a chemical reaction, the expansion of gases, kinetic energy. Era listened without interrupting. Her eyes were burning. Then she asked a question that changed everything. She asked if it was possible to protect the barrel from corrosive magic. Nathan didn't understand. Era explained. Mages can rust metal from a distance, a 3rd circle spell. It turns iron into rusty dust in seconds. If the Archmage figures out the gun's design, he won't fire fireballs. He'll just rust all the barrels with a single spell, and the squad will be left unarmed. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't thought of that. He couldn't think about it because he didn't know the rules of magic in this world. Era knew, and she knew how to protect them. Certain metal alloys are resistant to magical effects. Certain runes on the surface create interference for spells. She could teach him.
Nathan reached out his hand to her. Aric shook it. Thus began the alliance between the engineer and the mage. Aric changed everything in a month. She worked with Nathan every day. In the morning, she explained how magic worked, not in terms of spells and circles, but in terms Nathan could understand. Magic is energy. It flows through the gifted person's body like electricity through a wire. The different elements are different frequencies, to use Nathan's analogy. Fire is a high frequency, a rapid burst, a lot of energy over a short distance. Water is a medium frequency, flexible control. Earth is a low frequency, slow but powerful. Air is a variable frequency, unpredictable. A fireball is a directed burst of fiery energy shaped by the mage's will into a sphere. It flies along a ballistic trajectory like a thrown stone. Speed is about 40 paces per second. Range is up to 80 paces for a third circle mage. For an archmage, up to 200. Nathan was writing everything down, not on birch bark. Aric had brought real paper and ink with her. He filled page after page, tables, comparisons, the range of a fireball versus the range of a musket, casting speed versus reload speed, mana cost versus gunpowder cost. A mage gets tired. 20 fireballs and a third circle mage is exhausted for an hour. A marksman doesn't get tired. He shoots as long as he has gunpowder and bullets. One mage. 1,000 marksmen can be trained. A mage needs a natural gift. A marksman needs 3 weeks of training. Nathan compiled a summary table, which he privately called the Master Table of War. One third circle mage is roughly equal in firepower to 5 musketeers, but a mage requires 20 years of training and an innate gift. 5 musketeers cost 3 weeks of training and 5 matchlocks, 1,000-fold difference in cost. Magic was a luxury. Gunpowder was mass-produced. Magic didn't lose out on power. Magic lost out on scalability. Aric listened to his calculations and didn't argue. She saw the numbers. She was smart enough to understand what they meant for her world, and honest enough to accept it. She said she now understood why her family had been so afraid of the knowledge she sought, not because the cogs were dangerous, because understanding makes magic ordinary, and the ordinary doesn't grant power. Protecting the barrels from magic became their joint project. Aric experimented with runes, small symbols engraved on the barrel's surface. They created a disruption field that hindered magical effects on the metal. They didn't block it completely. They slowed it down. A corrosion spell that would rust a barrel in a second took a minute on a protected barrel. A minute in battle is an eternity. Nathan was satisfied. Not perfect, but it was enough. Then Aric suggested something more. She said she could enchant the bullets. Not with magical fire. Something simpler. Magical penetration. A rune on a lead bullet that weakens the magical shield at the point of impact. A bullet with such a rune won't pierce an archmage's shield, but it will weaken it. A second will weaken it further. A third will pierce it. Instead of 30 ordinary bullets, 3 runic ones would be enough for the shield. Nathan looked at her and smiled slowly. Mages had spent 1,000 years perfecting shields against swords and arrows. They had no experience with bullets bearing penetration runes. No defense. Not even an understanding of the threat. Yet. The problem was that Aric could enchant 10 bullets a day. It was manual labor, slow, energy-intensive. 10 runic bullets for 100 archers is a drop in the bucket. Nathan decided that the runic bullets would be for special purposes, against mages and their shields. Ordinary bullets for ordinary soldiers. The 11th month brought a guest Nathan wasn't expecting. A rider on a worn-out horse arrived at the mine at night. The guards stopped him at the entrance. He identified himself as a messenger from King Othmar. Nathan went out to meet him with Corvin and 4 archers behind him. The messenger was middle-aged, skinny, tired, covered in road dust from head to toe. He handed over a sealed letter. Nathan broke the seal, read it again. Then he handed it to Aric. She read it and looked at him silently. The letter was from the king's advisor, not from Othmar himself, from a man at court who wrote in his own name but clearly with the king's knowledge. The content was simple. The king knows about gunpowder weapons. The king knows about the massacre in the gorge. The king knows that Count Renaud is preparing a major punitive expedition. The king does not intend to intervene. But if the armorer from Holdren is willing to discuss supplying new weapons for the royal army, then certain doors might open. Certain protection might be provided. Nathan stood in the silence of the night, holding the letter in his hands. Corvin asked what was in it. Nathan said the king wanted to buy his weapons. Corvin asked what he would reply. Nathan was silent for a long time. Then he said he would say no, not now. Corvin was surprised. Nathan explained. If he sold weapons to the king now, he would become a supplier, a craftsman in service, valuable but replaceable. They'd lock him in a workshop and force him to forge guns for the king's soldiers. The technology would slip away from him. Sooner or later, the king would find other blacksmiths. He'd teach them, and Nathan would become unnecessary. He didn't want to be a supplier. He wanted to be a commander. The only person who mastered not only weapons, but also tactics, strategy, and the doctrine of their application. The one who could not be refused. The one who could not be replaced. He wrote a reply, polite, evasive. He thanked him for his attention. He expressed a willingness to negotiate, in the indefinite future, when circumstances were more favorable. The messenger left at dawn. Corvin said that Nathan was playing with fire, not gunpowder, political fire. Nathan replied that political fire was the only kind he feared. The first year ended with a battle that would later be called the Field of Smoke. Count Renaud spent 3 months gathering an army. He scraped together everything he had. He summoned his vassals. He hired mercenaries. He asked a neighboring baron for help. 200 knights, 100 infantrymen, 2 third circle mages, 1 fourth circle mage. A total of 3 mages and 300 warriors. Against a blacksmith's boy and his peasants. Renaud had no intention of underestimating his enemy twice. He had seen the survivors from the gorge. He'd heard their stories. He knew that a head-on attack in a narrow pass was suicide. That's why he chose the open field, the plain south of the hills. No gorges, no ravines. Flat grass stretching to the horizon. Knightly cavalry on open ground is a terrifying force. A battering charge by 200 armored horsemen would sweep away any infantry in this world, always, for 1,000 years. Nathan learned of the army's approach 4 days ago. The scouts Corvin had stationed along all the roads reported accurately. 300 men, 3 mages. They're coming from Renaud's castle, straight toward the hills. Nathan called a council. It was cramped in the mine. 120 archers, Corvin, Mara, Era, Davin, now commanding the first company of 40 men. Nathan spread out on the table the map of the area he'd been drawing for 3 months. Every hill, every stream, every contour of the terrain. He knew this plain like the back of his hand. Corvin said that in the open field, the knightly cavalry would crush them. 200 horsemen in armor. 1 blow, and the musketeers' formation would scatter like straw. Nathan said, no, it wouldn't scatter, if the formation was right. He told them about the Battle of Crécy, the year 1346. English archers against French cavalry. 6,000 archers behind stakes destroyed 12,000 knights. The reason was simple. Stakes, a ditch, distance. The French knights attacked head-on across a muddy field up the slope. The archers shot them down like targets. Cavalry is terrifying when it reaches its target. The infantry's task is to prevent them from reaching it. Nathan sketched out a diagram of the position. He chose a spot on a low hill at the edge of the plain. In front of the hill was a stream, shallow but with boggy banks. The horses would get stuck. Beyond the stream was a waist-deep ditch. Behind the ditch was a row of sharpened stakes driven into the ground at an angle. Behind the stakes was an earthen rampart made of sandbags. Behind the rampart were 3 lines of musketeers. At the top of the hill were 2 cannons. He had built the second cannon over the past month, larger than the first, 4-inch caliber. It fired cannonballs or grape shot, heavy. 4 men hauled it on wheels. But it had a range of 100 paces, and at that distance, the grape shot mowed down everything living within a cone 10 paces wide. Nathan spent 3 days preparing the position. 120 men dug a trench and drove in stakes. They filled sacks with earth. They built a rampart. Corvin marked out the lines of fire, stakes every 10 paces across the field in front of the position. 30 paces, 50, 70, 100. The archers knew the range for each stake. Era enchanted the barrels of both cannons, runic protection against corrosion, and she prepared 40 runic bullets for Davin's snipers, targets for the mages. The morning of the battle, fog, gray pre-dawn light. Nathan stood on the hill and looked out over the plain. Renaud's army appeared from the south as the sun rose horizon. Banners, the gleam of plate armor, knights in front, infantry behind. 3 mages on horseback beside the count. Nathan looked through the spyglass that Era had found among her belongings, a gift from her father. It magically magnified the image. Count Renaud rode at the front, in full armor, with a coat of arms on his shield. Nathan could see his face, calm, confident. The face of a man who had come to crush the rebellious peasants and return in time for dinner. Nathan lowered the spyglass. He turned toward the ranks. 120 men behind an earthen rampart, 3 ranks of 40, muskets at the shoulder, eyes tense, hands on the triggers. Corvin walked behind the formation and spoke softly, without shouting, in the calm voice of a veteran. Load on command. Fire on command. Reload on command. Don't think. Don't be afraid. Do what you know how to do. 3 weeks of drill, so that at this moment your hands would move on their own. Renaud's army stopped 300 paces away, forming up, knights in the front line, infantry in the second, mages slightly behind. Nathan counted. 200 mounted, 100 on foot, 3 mages. On his side, 120 archers, 2 cannons, a fortified position. The numbers were against him. Technology was on his side. The knights moved forward, at a walk, then at a trot. The banners fluttered, the ground rumbled. 200 armored horses, a sight that would make any infantry in the world drop their weapons and run. Nathan stood. His men stood. Corvin stood. Mara stood next to the powder supply. Era stood next to Nathan. Her hands glowed with a faint blue light. She was preparing a water shield in case of fireballs. 50 paces to the stakes. Nathan raised his hand. The knights broke into a gallop. The thunder of hooves drowned out everything. The first galloped into the stream. They got stuck. The riders behind them pressed forward. A crush. Screams. Nathan lowered his hand. The cannons fired first. 2 volleys of grape shot tore through the crowd of horses and riders at the stream crossing. Pieces of iron flew at a speed this world had never seen. Armor offered no protection. At that range, the grape shot pierced the cuirass and exited the other side. The first row fired a volley, 40 muskets. The second row, the third, reloading, the first again. Smoke blanketed the entire field. Nathan couldn't see a thing. He could hear screams, neighs, crunching, a volley, reloading, a volley. The 4th circle mage raised a fire shield and cast a fireball at the position. Era intercepted it with a water shield. Steam exploded in the air. Davin and 4 snipers opened fire with rune bullets at the mage. 3 bullets. 4. 5. The mage's shield flickered and burst. The 6th bullet struck him in the chest. The mage fell from his horse. The 2 remaining mages retreated. Without their leader, they didn't dare to attack. 20 minutes later, it was all over. The field in front of Nathan's position was littered with bodies. Horses and riders lay intermingled. The moat was full. The stakes were broken by the weight of the dead horses. But not a single knight had reached the rampart, not a single one. Nathan climbed down the hill. His legs wouldn't hold him. He sat down on the ground at the foot of the hill and closed his eyes. 120 peasants with iron tubes had just destroyed the Count's army. Nathan's losses: 7 killed, 12 wounded, from shrapnel and a single fireball that Aric hadn't managed to intercept. Count Renaud was alive. They'd pulled him out from under a dead horse. He was kneeling at the foot of the hill. His armor was dented, his face was ashen, his eyes were empty. Nathan approached him. He looked down at him. He didn't say a word. He turned and walked away. Corvin stood amid the smoke on the field and said nothing. Then he quietly said that he had fought for 30 years, that he had seen dozens of battles, and that today he had seen an era come to an end. After the field of smoke, Nathan's world changed overnight. Messengers spread the news throughout the county in 2 days, throughout the kingdom in a week, across the continent in a month. 300 soldiers and 3 mages destroyed by a peasant militia. Count Renaud on his knees. Not a single knight having reached the enemy lines. Corvin's words about the end of an era were no longer a metaphor. They had become fact. Nathan let Renaud go. It was a calculated move, not mercy. A dead count would become a martyr. A living, humiliated count would become a warning. Renaud rode away on a stranger's horse in crumpled armor with a handful of survivors. Nathan gave him a message for King Othmar, a short one. He wrote that he was no rebel. He made no claim to the count's lands. He made no claim to titles. He wanted one thing: the status of a free commander with the right to raise an army, and to negotiate with the crown as an equal, not as a peasant before a lord, but as a force before a force. The letter was bold. Nathan knew that. But he knew something else as well. After the field of smoke, Othmar had no choice. If the king refused, Nathan would become a rallying cry for every discontented peasant on the continent. If he agreed, he would gain an ally with weapons no one else possessed. Othmar was no fool. Nathan was counting on that. While waiting for a reply, he built. The mine had become too cramped. 120 people, plus workshops, plus gunpowder stores, plus living quarters. Nathan moved the camp to the surface. The former estate of Count Renaud stood empty. The servants had fled. The steward had fled to the capital. Nathan took his place, not as a looter, as the new authority. Peasants from the surrounding villages came on their own and asked whom they should now pay taxes to. Nathan said there were no taxes. There was work. Whoever wanted to work would be paid, in silver, every week. He hired 200 men, half for construction, barracks, workshops, warehouses, a shooting range. The other half for production, mining ore from old mines, smelting iron, forging barrels. Gunpowder production, casting bullets. Mara took charge of gunpowder production. She now had 20 workers, 10 full-cycle saltpeter pits, a mill on the stream for grinding the ingredients, an output of 300 pounds of gunpowder per week. She developed a granulation system that produced gunpowder of consistent quality. Each batch was tested for burning speed. Mara devised a simple test: an elbow-length track of gunpowder on a smooth board. Light one end. Count your heartbeats until the other end catches fire. If it takes more than 3, the batch is rejected. If less than 2, it's too fast. Dangerous. Between 2 and 3 is ideal. Nathan watched her method and thought that, on Earth, they would have granted a patent for it. Hadrian worked in the forge every day. The old man didn't complain. He saw what was happening. He saw how his adopted son had gone from a skinny apprentice to a man to whom hundreds were subordinate, and he accepted it in silence. He taught the new blacksmiths, 5 lads from the villages who knew how to handle a hammer. Nathan gave them blueprints. Hadrian taught them to read the metal, where it was ready, where it was overheated, where the seam was weak. His old hands knew what the engineer's mind from another world did not. The body remembers the heat, the sound of a proper strike, the color of metal at the right temperature. This cannot be explained in words. It can only be shown. Hadrian showed them. Era worked on the runic protection. She enchanted every barrel in the arsenal. 120 muskets, 2 cannons. Each barrel bore 3 runes of resistance. It took time, half an hour of work per rune. Era spent 6 hours a day on this and collapsed from exhaustion every evening. Nathan saw this. He told her they needed another way, a mass method. Era thought about it for a week. Then she suggested a rune stamp. Instead of hand engraving, she created a stamp. An iron plate with an engraved rune pattern. You heat it up, press it against the barrel. The rune is imprinted and activated by the heat. Not as strong as the hand-engraved ones, 70% effective, but 10 trunks an hour instead of 2 a day. Nathan hugged her, for the first time. Not romantically, like a man who had found the solution to a problem that had been keeping him awake. Era froze for a second. Then she pulled away and said she needed more iron for the stamps. Nathan laughed. King Othmar's reply arrived 6 weeks later, not by messenger, with a delegation, 12 horsemen, the king's advisor, 2 scribes, 8 guards, and 1 archmage. Nathan stood at the gate of the former Renauld estate and watched the approaching column. Corvin and 20 musketeers stood in formation nearby. Era was slightly behind them. Mara was in the workshop doorway. The delegation stopped 30 paces away. The archmage dismounted first. An old man, tall, thin. White hair down to his shoulders, a plain gray robe, eyes like 2 pieces of ice. Nathan recognized him from Era's descriptions even before the advisor introduced him. Vortigern, a 6th circle archmage, one of the 7 most powerful mages in the kingdom. He was 70 years old and could reduce the entire estate to ashes with a single spell. Vortigern did not speak to Nathan in front of everyone. He asked for a private conversation. Nathan agreed. Corvin objected. He said that the archmage could kill him with a snap of his fingers. Nathan replied that if Vortigern wanted to kill him, 20 musketeers wouldn't help. The 6th circle is a different level. They sat down in the former steward's office. A desk, 2 chairs, a window overlooking the courtyard where the musketeers stood in formation. Vortigern sat down and was silent for a long time. Then he began to speak, not as Nathan had expected. No threats, no arrogance, quietly, wearily. Like a man who had carried a heavy burden for 70 years and had finally found someone to whom he could confide. He said he knew what gunpowder was. Nathan froze. Vortigern continued. He said that 1,000 years ago there had been a civilization on Velmark. Not a magical one, a technological one. They built machines. They extracted energy from the Earth's depths. They created weapons that destroyed cities in seconds. They didn't know magic. They knew science. And science led them to war. Not just one, the final one. The war lasted 30 years. When it ended, nothing remained on Velmark. Scorched earth, poisoned rivers, dead forests. The population had shrunk tenfold. From the ruins, the mages rose. Those few gifted ones who had survived. They gathered and forged a pact. The first 7 archmages. They decided that technology was the path to destruction, and they sealed it away. Not with a spell, with a system. The magical aristocracy was created intentionally. Not because mages are better, because mages are controllable. A mage needs a gift from birth. The gift is rare. There are few mages. A war of mages means hundreds of deaths. A war of technology means millions. The pact stated that magic would be the only power, that knowledge of gunpowder and machines would be forgotten, that the blacksmith guilds would forge swords and armor but never go further, that anyone who rediscovers the way of fire would be destroyed. Nathan listened and felt something cold tightening inside him.
He hadn't ended up in Aric's body by accident. He wasn't the first. Vortigern had said so plainly. Over 1,000 years, 7 had come with the same knowledge. 7 souls from beyond the edge. All 7 had been found and stopped. 6 were killed. 1 went mad when shown the ruins of an ancient civilization. Nathan asked what had drawn them here. Vortigern replied that beneath Velmark lies what remains of an ancient civilization. Not machines, not weapons, memory. The collective spirit of the engineers and scientists who perished in the last war. This spirit seeks a guide, one who will continue their path. But each time, the path ends the same way. Gunpowder, weapons, war, destruction, a cycle. Nathan sat in silence. His thoughts raced. He remembered the testing ground, the flash, the darkness, then waking up in a stranger's body. He hadn't been killed by accident during the tests. He had been chosen, pulled out, a weapons engineer, the perfect candidate. But Vortigern said that Nathan was different from the previous 7. They came and immediately began building weapons. Only weapons. Bombs, explosives, machines of destruction. Nathan started the same way, but he built something else. Not just weapons. A system, industry, training, tactics. He wasn't building a tool of murder. He was building an army that defends rather than destroys. And most importantly, Nathan remembered where that had led on Earth. He remembered the world wars. Hiroshima, the Cold War. He knew the price of progress. The previous 7 did not. Vortigern looked Nathan in the eyes. The old man's eyes were tired and light. He said he hadn't come to kill. He'd come to ask. What Nathan planned to do next. Build cannons and drench the continent in blood. Or find another way. Nathan didn't answer right away. He thought for 3 minutes. 3 whole minutes of silence in the small office. Then he spoke. He said he knew where unchecked progress led. He knew better than anyone on this continent. He had seen the Earth after 2 world wars. He had seen nuclear weapons. He had seen how technology turned from an instrument of freedom into an instrument of total control. He didn't want that for Velmark, but the treaty wasn't working either. 1,000 years of magical aristocracy is 1,000 years of slavery for those born without the gift. Peasants live like cattle, without rights, without a voice, without hope. Magic doesn't protect them. Magic keeps them down. 1,000 years of stability built on the bones of commoners. Vortigern didn't argue. He nodded. He knew. Nathan said he was proposing a third way. Not magic versus technology. Magic and technology together. Checks and balances. Mages control gunpowder. Gunpowder controls mages. Neither side can destroy the other. Equilibrium. Not the kind of equilibrium that relies on oppression. A balance held by mutual dependence. Vortigern listened in silence. Then he said it sounded beautiful. But he asked who would control the controllers. Nathan replied that it was the right question, and that the answer would take time. A long time. Vortigern stood up. He extended his hand. Nathan shook it. The old archmage and the young engineer. 2 eras, 2 worlds, 1 handshake. Vortigern said he would return to the king and report that the armorer from Holdren was not a rebel, that he was dangerous but reasonable, that he could be reasoned with. He said this was not an alliance. Not yet. It was a truce. Nathan accepted. The delegation left the next morning. The king's advisor left a document. Official recognition of Nathan as commander of a free company. The right to recruit up to 300 men. The right to bear arms. Direct subordination to the crown, bypassing the earls and barons. Not everything Nathan wanted, but enough for the next step. For the 2nd and 3rd years, Nathan built. He didn't fight, he built. The crown's recognition gave him breathing room. The counts and barons didn't touch him because a royal decree stood behind him. The mages didn't touch him because Vortigern had given his word. Nathan made the most of every day. The arsenal grew tenfold. 3 forges worked non-stop. 20 blacksmiths forged barrels according to Nathan's blueprints. Hadrian supervised them. The old man no longer stood at the forge himself. He was 70. His hands trembled. But his voice was firm, and the young blacksmiths listened to him as if he were their father. Mara had turned the gunpowder production into a factory. 50 workers, 20 saltpeter pits, 3 mills, a weekly output of 1,000 pounds of gunpowder. She had developed a safety system after one worker nearly blew up the warehouse by dropping a lamp near an open barrel. Wet floors, copper tools instead of iron ones, no open flames within a 100-foot radius, separate rooms for each stage, mixing in one building, drying in another, storage in a third. Nathan recognized in her rules the safety protocols of 18th century gunpowder factories. Mara had arrived at them on her own, through experience and logic. Aric trained 4 young mages, whom Nathan had found among the peasant children. Weak talents, first and second circles. The magical aristocracy wouldn't have noticed them. Here, they became rune masters. Aric taught them to inscribe protective runes on the barrels. 10 barrels an hour each. The 4 worked in shifts. 40 barrels a day. The arsenal grew. By the end of the second year, Nathan had 300 musketeers, organized into 3 companies of 100 men each. Each company had a captain and 3 sergeants. Davin commanded the first company. He had risen from a street urchin to an officer. Tough, precise. His men were the best shots. Corvin remained the head trainer. He developed a training program that turned a peasant into a marksman in 4 weeks. The first week was drill. The second was weapons and reloading. The third was shooting. The fourth was tactics and formation. After 4 weeks, a soldier stood at attention and fired on command without thinking. Thinking was the officer's job. Nathan began work on the rifled barrel at the start of the 3rd year. On Earth, rifling appeared in the 15th century, but only became widespread in the 19th. The spiral grooves inside the barrel spun the bullet around its axis. The rotation stabilized the flight. Range and accuracy tripled. The problem was the tool. Cutting grooves inside a barrel by hand is precision work. Nathan designed the simplest rifling machine, an iron rod with a cutter that was pulled through the barrel and rotated a quarter turn with each pass. 20 passes produced 4 rifling grooves, spaced 3 calibers apart. The first rifled barrel fired at a range of 150 paces, with an accuracy 4 times that of a smoothbore musket. Nathan set up a target 100 paces away and hit it 5 times out of 5. Corvin asked to try. He hit 4 out of 5. He shook his head and said that this was no longer an infantry weapon. It was a killer's weapon. Nathan agreed. The rifled barrels went to the snipers, 1 per 10 men. The rest continued to fire from smoothbores. Mass production of rifled barrels was too slow. 1 barrel a day instead of 5 smoothbores. The artillery grew to 8 guns. 4 light cannons on field carriages. 2 heavy siege bombards. 2 mortars for arcing fire that Nathan had spent 3 months building. The mortar fired a cast iron shell along an arcing trajectory. The shell flew over the walls and fell inside the fortress. On Earth, mortars had rendered castles useless. On Velmark, castles were the foundation of the aristocracy's power. Nathan was building weapons that rendered castles obsolete. By the end of the 3rd year, his army numbered 1,200 men, 1,000 musketeers in 10 companies, 200 artillerymen and support personnel, 8 cannons, a supply train carrying gunpowder and provisions for a 3-month independent campaign. And then war came. Not the one Nathan had chosen, the one that had chosen him. The 3 great houses of Eastern Velmark had united. Duke Malorin, Marquis Dressig, Count Holvain. Together, they mustered 4,000 knights and 30 mages. Their goal was simple: to destroy the gunpowder threat before it became irreversible. They sent an ultimatum to King Othmar: hand over the armorer Nathan or face war. Othmar summoned Nathan to the capital, their first face-to-face meeting. The throne room, marble, banners, courtiers in silk. Othmar sat on the throne and looked at Nathan. Short, thin, in a plain uniform, without a coat of arms, no crown, no magic, with the hands of a blacksmith. Othmar said that 3 houses were at war,
and that he had no army capable of stopping them. His knights were good, but there were few of them. His mages were strong, but there were fewer than 30 of them. Nathan said that his 1,200 archers and 8 cannons would stop 4,000 knights. Othmar asked on what terms. Nathan replied, "The position of Supreme Commander of the United Army. Complete freedom in tactics and strategy. After victory, permanent status as military advisor to the crown, with the right to maintain his own armed forces. And the repeal of the law prohibiting commoners from bearing arms." Othmar was silent for a long time. Then he agreed. He had no choice. The army of the 3 houses took the field at the beginning of the 4th year. 4,000 knights, 1,000 infantrymen, 30 battle mages, 5 of them 5th circle, 1 6th circle. A 6th circle mage could cast a shield that withstood 100 arrows, could unleash a firestorm over an area 200 paces wide, could raise a stone wall from the ground in 3 seconds. Nathan had never fought against such a force before. Vortigern came to Nathan 2 days before the battle. He came alone, without a robe, in simple traveling clothes. The old man said he could not openly participate in the battle on Nathan's side. The treaty forbade archmages from fighting each other, but he could offer advice. A 6th circle mage named Dralion. His weakness is time. The firestorm requires 20 seconds of preparation. 20 seconds during which the mage stands motionless and vulnerable. He casts the shield separately from the attack. He cannot attack and defend at the same time. Either the shield or the storm. A choice, Nathan remembered. 20 seconds. He chose a battlefield, a plain by the Karen River, wide, open, but with one feature. The left flank abutted the river, the right, the forest. The front line was 3,000 paces long. This meant that the army of the 3 houses could not outflank him. Only a frontal assault. Only across the field that Nathan controlled. He had laid out the positions over 3 days. 1,200 musketeers in 4 lines of 300 each. The first 3 lines were riflemen. The 4th was a reserve. 8 guns on 2 ridges. 4 light cannons on the left, 4 on the right, including 2 heavy bombards and 2 mortars. In front of the position, a knee-deep trench. Behind the trench, stakes. Behind the stakes, a sandbag embankment. Classic. But Nathan added something new. He had placed hidden charges across the field. Barrels of gunpowder buried elbow deep. A tarred fuse ran to each one. When the cavalry rode over them, Nathan would light the fuses. An explosion from below. Horses in panic. The formation breaks. Nathan didn't invent mines. He remembered them. The morning of the battle, a gray sky, a breeze from the river. It was cold. Nathan stood on a hill between the batteries and looked through his spyglass. The army of the 3 houses was forming a half-league to the east. Beautiful. Banners, glinting armor, columns of horsemen, mages in bright robes on white horses. A spectacle of 1,000-year-old military tradition. The last spectacle of that tradition. Aira stood nearby, silent. Her hands glowed blue. She was preparing a water shield. Not 1, 3. 1 over Nathan, 1 over the left battery, 1 over the right. Mara stood by the powder wagon, her face pale, her hands steady. She was in charge of supplying ammunition. Every minute, a porter ran from the wagon to the lines with a sack of powder and bullets. A conveyor belt, uninterrupted. Corvin walked behind the formation, quietly, calmly. Familiar words in a familiar voice. Load on command. Fire on command. Keep formation. Don't think about what's in front of you. Think about what's beside you. Comrade on the left. Comrade on the right. Formation is life. A lone soldier is death. Bugles sounded on the enemy's side. The cavalry moved out. 2,000 horsemen in the first wave. At a walk, at a trot, at a gallop. The ground shook. Nathan counted the distance. 800 paces. 600. 400. 300. The mortars struck first. 2 cast iron cannonballs arced down into the center of the mass of horsemen. Explosions of earth and shrapnel. Breaches in the ranks. The horses shuddered, but the mass pressed on. The riders behind pushed those in front forward. 200 paces. The light cannons opened fire. Grape shot at 200 paces tore through the front ranks. Horses fell head over heels. Riders flew over their heads. But 4,000 is too many. The mass absorbed the losses and pressed on. 150 paces. The front horses stepped on hidden charges. Nathan nodded. Mara lit the fuses. A 3-second delay. Explosions. 12 barrels burst simultaneously. Fountains of earth and fire. Horses reared up. Riders were thrown from their saddles. The cavalry formation broke apart. A wall of smoke and panic separated the front ranks from the rear. 100 paces. The first row of musketeers fired a volley. 300 bullets. The second row. The third. 900 bullets in 30 seconds. Smoke blanketed the entire field. Nathan fired blindly. No, not blindly. Across the field, 300 musketeers in a line, 600 paces wide. Every bullet flew into a wall of horses and men. It was impossible to miss. The mages joined the fray 5 minutes later. The 10 of the 5th circle raised their shields and began unleashing firestorms. 3 strikes missed. 2 hit the left flank. Fire rained down on the line of musketeers. 10 were incinerated instantly. Aric cast a water shield onto the flank. Too late. But the shield stopped the second strike. Nathan shouted to the snipers. 20 rifled barrels with runic bullets. Targets? The mages. Die range, 150 paces. At that distance, a rifled musket hit a person with an 80% probability. 20 shots, 16 hits. The runic bullets pierced the magical shields of 4 5th circle mages. 2 fell dead, 2 were wounded. The 5th retreated. Dralion remained, a 6th circle mage. He stepped forward, alone, hands raised. The air around him grew scorching. The ground beneath his feet melted. He was preparing a firestorm. Nathan counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. The storm would take 20 seconds. Vortigern hadn't lied. Nathan shouted to Davin, "First company, all 40 barrels, rune bullets, 1 target." Davin gave the order. 40 barrels swung toward Dralion. Volley. 40 rune bullets struck a single point in space. Dralion's shield held, but it cracked. Nathan shouted, "Reload!" 12 seconds. Dralion continued casting. 15th second. 16th. Second volley. 40 bullets. The shield burst. 3 bullets hit Dralion. He staggered. The firestorm broke free from his hands, unfinished, not at Nathan's position, into the sky. A pillar of fire shot up 100 meters and dissipated. Dralion fell to his knees, then face first into the ground. After Dralion fell, the battle raged on for another 10 minutes, but it was no longer a battle. It was a rout. The knights turned and fled, those who could. The infantry threw down their weapons. The mages retreated, covering the withdrawal. Nathan ordered a ceasefire when the distance exceeded 200 paces. Not out of mercy, out of calculation. The fugitives would spread the news. News more terrifying than any volley. After Karen, silence fell. Not peaceful, deafening. The continent was silent for 3 weeks. Then it spoke, all at once. Messengers rode along every road in Velmark, from kingdom to kingdom, from duchy to duchy. 4,000 knights, 30 mages, a 6th circle mage, destroyed by a peasant army in a single hour. The words sounded like madness, but the survivors confirmed it. Thousands of witnesses, smoke, a roar, iron rods that kill from a distance without magic, a peasant army that cannot be broken. The world of Velmark changed in a single morning by the Karen River, and everyone understood it. Duke Malaran sent an envoy a week later, not with an army, with a peace offer. Marquis Dressig fled to a neighboring kingdom and sought asylum. Count Holvain laid down his arms and surrendered the castle to King Othmar voluntarily. The three great houses that had dictated their will to kings for 1,000 years had capitulated to a man without a title and without magic. Nathan did not celebrate. He sat in his tent by the Karen River and looked out at the field. The bodies had already been cleared away. The wounded had been carried away. But the ground was black with gunpowder and blood. Era entered quietly. She sat down beside him, in silence. They sat like that for a long time. Then Nathan said that in his world, such battles were the beginning, not the end. That after gunpowder came larger cannons, then machine guns, then bombs, then nuclear weapons. Every step made the war more terrifying. Every step seemed like the last, and it never was. Rera asked if he was afraid that Velmark would go down the same path. Nathan said yes, he was afraid. But he said there was a difference. There was no magic on Earth. There was no force capable of balancing technology from within. Here there is, mages and engineers. Two forces, two poles. If the system is built correctly, they will keep each other in check, without destroying, controlling. Era placed her hand on his. She said nothing. Nathan didn't pull his hand away. The fourth year became a year of diplomacy. Nathan didn't fight. He traveled, from capital to capital, from palace to palace, a simple uniform without coats of arms, the hands of a blacksmith, the eyes of an engineer. He was received by kings who, a year ago, would not have seated him at the table. Now they listened. He said the same thing everywhere. The age of knights was over. The age of the magical monopoly was over. One could accept this and build a new world. One could deny it and be swept away when technology spread, and it would spread. Nathan knew this from Earth's history. Gunpowder cannot be forgotten. One can only lead its use. The proposal was simple, a continental treaty, a new one. Not the one the archmages had concluded 1,000 years ago, a different one. Gunpowder is permitted, but production is controlled. Armories are supervised by a council comprising mages, engineers, and representatives of the crown. A new type of army is formed in every kingdom, trained regular units instead of a noble militia. Commoners are granted the right to serve, and, in return for their service, receive land and status. The magical aristocracy retains its privileges but loses its monopoly on military power. Mages become the elite, not the sole power. Not everyone agreed. 2 kingdoms in the west refused. 3 dukes in the south declared Nathan a heretic and an enemy of order. The church excommunicated him for blasphemy and consorting with fire demons. Nathan did not react. He waited. By the end of the 4th year, the western kingdoms attempted to create their own gunpowder weapons. They stole the gunpowder recipe through a spy. They built muskets, poor ones, without runic protection, without proper metallurgy, without ballistic calculations. 3 barrels exploded during testing. 2 shooters were killed. They came to Nathan 6 months later, no longer with demands, with a request. The principle of a single solution that Nathan had established from day one had worked. A gunpowder recipe without ballistics is useless. Ballistics without metallurgy is useless. Metallurgy without runic protection is useless. The entire cycle only worked together, and the entire cycle was in the mind of one man. Nathan did not refuse them. He offered terms, the same as for everyone else: a contract, a council, oversight, equality. The 5th year, the final year of this story. Nathan stood in the hall of the Continental Council, a new building in the capital of the Kingdom of Othmar. A circular hall, stone walls, high ceilings. 12 people sat at the table. The 7 kings of Velmark, Vortigern on behalf of the magical order, 2 representatives of the blacksmith guilds, Nathan and Era. They were signing the Karen Treaty, named after the battle that changed everything. A treaty of 32 articles, gunpowder production under the council's supervision, armories in every kingdom. The magical order retains its autonomy, but joins the military council. Commoners gain the right to military service and civil status. The blacksmith guilds were reformed and adopted engineering knowledge. Nathan was the last to sign. He wrote his name at the bottom of the parchment, Aric of Holdren. Not Nathan, Aric. He had chosen that name long ago. Nathan had died on a training ground in another world. Aric was born in a smithy on Velmark, and Aric changed this world. After signing, Vortigern approached him. The old man looked tired, 72 years old, white hair. His hands were covered in age spots, but his eyes were clear. He said that 7 before Aric had come with the same knowledge, and all 7 had chosen war, only war. Aric was the first to choose peace after the war. Aric replied that he hadn't chosen peace. He had chosen balance. Peace was a side effect. Vortigern smiled. He said that for a side effect, it wasn't bad. In the evening, Aric stepped out onto the balcony. The city lay below. Lights, smoke from chimneys, the sounds of life. Era stood beside him. She took his hand, without asking. She just took it. Aric didn't pull away. She asked what came next. Aric said that what came next was the hardest part. To build a world where gunpowder and magic don't destroy each other. Era said that was a lifetime's work. Aric said he had a life. One had ended at the firing range. The second was just beginning. Far to the south, in the Holdren smithy, old Hadrian sat by the extinguished forge. His hands rested on his knees, large, calloused, the hands of a blacksmith who had bent iron all his life. Before him on the wall hung the first barrel, an iron tube strapped to a wooden stock with leather straps, rough, crooked. The first musket in the history of Velmark. Hadrian looked at it and smiled quietly. The workshop smelled of coal and sulfur, as always. A newspaper lay nearby on the workbench, the first newspaper on Velmark, printed on a press that Mara had built from Aric's blueprints. On the front page, in large letters, "The Karen Treaty has been signed. The age of gunpowder and magic begins." Below was a portrait, a young man in a simple uniform, the hands of a blacksmith, the eyes of an engineer. The caption, Aric of Holdren, Supreme Commander, Architect of the New World. Hadrian folded the newspaper. He placed it on the workbench next to the first barrel. Then he stood up. He walked over to the forge. He stoked the coals. He placed an iron ingot in the heat. He picked up a hammer and began to forge. The old blacksmith did what he knew how to do, and the world outside the walls of his smithy was changing.